a major concern in his life, Dr. Joel Torstenson. Dr. Torstenson is the chairman of the Department of Sociology, a graduate of Augsburg. He has his PhD from the University of Minnesota. He is presently on leave from the college in order that he might go further into this whole matter of the place of the liberal arts college in the emerging urban culture. And I've asked him to give a brief address to this group today on this subject, the challenge of the city to Augsburg College. Dr. Joel Torstenson.
I have a feeling that the pressure of time really makes it critical for me to condense my remarks in some very few brief observations. And I feel entirely justified in this, since so many of the things that I have intended to say have already been expressed by people far better qualified to express them than myself. I was very gratified with the stance of Dr. Blagan's presentation, this sense of linkages between the past and the present, and with a deep commitment to the future. It seems to me this is one of the most urgent needs of our time, is that instead of lamenting the perils of our time, somehow with a sense of optimism that is not naive, face the future with hope and vigor and creativity and confidence. Now, I just want to make a few comments about the way it looks to me concerning the challenges of the city to Augsburg College. It seems to me that even if the pioneers who planned and promoted the transfer of this college from a small village in Wisconsin to its present location in the very center of a great city had the prevision of the social reality of 1966, they could hardly have chosen a more appropriate and strategic place to locate the beginnings of this institution in this area. If you look at the map of the Twin City metropolitan area, as it is now defined by the Twin City Metropolitan Planning Commission, as Dr. Naftalin recently alluded to, you will find that Augsburg College, together with the University of Minnesota and the other institutions that now formed the University Development Corporation, you'll find that we are located at the very center of this great emerging metropolis. Now, some of us have been lamenting the high cost of land, around here when it comes to getting the land and making ready for new facilities, and I share that sense of frustration about the rather exorbitant price. Yet it may well be, though I'm not a complete disciple of those who think that the market really determines justice. Tony had something to say about the market being the automatic regulator of justice in human society. He didn't exactly affirm it, but it may well be that the high price of land is really a pretty cheap price, because it seems to me we have chosen a very strategic place to carry on liberal education in the modern world. It is as if we have a ringside seat at the emerging metropolis. For those who think that we ought to have, fanned out into suburbia back in 1946, when this was a condition, an option, I think we have, and there were reasons for and against this kind of a move. It seems to me that in retrospect, I think we can agree that it was a fortunate thing that those who believed we ought to stay right here, that their judgment prevailed. Now, I suppose everybody won't agree with that. But it seems to me, in the very nature of the case, our location is strategic. Now, I think it is our cognizance of this fact that has led to the theme of this symposium, the challenge of the city. Now, this is not a unique event in our country. And one of the things that has impressed me about the theme we have selected and the motif of our first centennial celebration is that it is very similar to the kinds of themes that are reproduced in other centers of higher learning at this very moment. When I was on the campus of MIT, I learned that at this very moment there is an intercollegiate conference on the urban challenge. So while we're talking about this challenge of the city, right now at MIT campus, students from the universities and colleges in New England are assembled to talk about the urban challenge. The president of the MIT, in lending his support to this venture, alluded to the fact that the challenge of our time is to find leadership for our time, enlightened leadership, to direct and utilize our technical power and prowess to humanize, to beautify, and to make economically viable our great urban centers. I would like to have added one more dimension to that, make politically viable our urban centers. Now, there are many other ways in which the kinds of things we are doing are being replicated throughout the country. And the development of centers for urban studies throughout the country is one of these. I am not going to say any more about this because our time is really, really up. But I would just like to say, now why is this such a strategic location and what is the challenge before us? And it seems to me, in the first instance, we are strategically located to do a creative job in building an image of the city that is appropriate and adequate for the time in which we live. Our address this morning, I think, has helped to convince us, even more than we were perhaps convinced already, that we all have a strong legacy of agrarian fundamentalism running through our veins, or is it our psyche or our nervous system, or where it is, where these centers are is something of a problem. But in any case, we are children of agrarian fundamentalism living in an urban age. And I think to examine this historically is a source for emancipation. History is always potentially a source for entrapment as well as a source for enlightenment and freedom. And I think the self-examination of our historical past gives us a sense of freedom from the traps of history. I'm sure that there is a lot of work yet to do in clearing out our mental fabric of some of the negative dimensions of our agrarian legacy. Now, don't tell all my farmer friends that I said this. They are still deeply impressed by the agrarian fundamentalism, some of them. Now, I think once we have come to terms with an adequate image of the city, then we immediately began to see the resources of the community that are available to us. We are open to them. And I think we are living literally in a laboratory for liberal learning, which is really unsurpassed in the upper Midwest. And we share this with the University of Minnesota and similar institutions in this part of the country. And when I mention the University of Minnesota, it is an interesting thing that the pioneers who decided to make the move here made two judgments, which I think have proven to be sound. One is that Minneapolis was going to be a big city and a great city, and we ought to be located in that. And it was also terribly important for the college to be closely related to the University of Minnesota. These two judgments, I think, have proven entirely sound. And when I make reference to the University of Minnesota, it's just inescapable that we're just almost inspired by the resources that are available to us here. The movement of the library across the river is is a great convenience, which I think will have a great deal to contribute to the life of this college. We kind of get it for free, and we should never grumble about our taxes. We should send a little extra contribution. And then the fine arts, the symphony, and now we're going to have the museum. I believe the fine arts building will be developing on this site. I don't know all the developments, but it's just a great thing to be so closely related to the university, both geographically and in the other ways which have been emerging through our historical relationships. Now, the political structure. I cannot refrain from identifying the political life of this metropolis as a great resource for liberal learning. I simply do not share the anti-government mentality that has somehow accompanied the agrarian fundamentalist legacy. It takes about 4 minutes to get down to the courthouse. And, students can take a trip down the courthouse and visit. The mayors don't have anything else to do but to entertain students who want to interview them. But to get so close to the centers of government for educational institutions in our time is terribly important. I'm sure that we haven't exploited fully the potential resources here. Our proximity to the state capital, the freeway is going to get us within 5-10 minutes from that place, if the freeways don't develop too much autosclerosis. The whole pattern of government as an indigenous part of modern metropolitan life is a tremendous resource for our students and for the faculty. And we are, of course, close to some of the pioneering work that is going on in the urban ministries of our churches. And during the last 3 weeks, I've stopped, as a rule, in every city at some of the leading universities and 2 or 3 pioneering ventures of the church in the inner city, and as well as at planning offices and governmental offices. And it's an inspiration to know that religious leadership is beginning to take a new look at the city, and they are part of the pioneering team in the frontier of urban life in our time. Now, welfare institutions, other educational institutions, health institutions, and so on are part of the resource at our beck and call. Now, having said something about the community as a laboratory for learning, I want to say something about the community as an occasion for creative involvement. And I can just name it, really. But I think that there is no doubt that abstractions are important, but to speculate only in terms of abstractions is inadequate in the learning process. Creative involvement in community life is certainly one of the most important challenges of the city for Augsburg College. And I am glad that some of our students, at least, have become more deeply involved in political life in the city of Minneapolis. And this is, I suppose, a nonpartisan observation. They are becoming deeply involved in the experimental religious efforts in some of the special problems of urban ministry. They are involved in research. I suppose every year that I read probably 100 research papers in which the primary sources are taken from observations and field trips and interviews with representatives of the agencies and political groups and all the rest that are part of our community life. And then in the last point, I do want to make a comment that it seems to me an ideal setting for a creative encounter with the value issues of our time. I have been reading literature of city planners a good deal in the last few years, particularly the last year, and certainly one of the most critical issues that they are grappling with is what are the values that ought to guide us in the renewal of life in the modern metropolis. And it is unthinkable to me that students and faculty at an academic institution with the legacies of liberal education that reach back to Jerusalem and Athens and Rome and a few other great cities of our past, that students in this kind of a situation should be unconcerned about the value issues of creating a life that is viable both in terms of our best judgments of what is a humane society, as well as in terms of our judgments as to what is a viable metropolitan life in the future. I can't help but say a word about beauty. We had a professor in English when I was in undergraduate study here who talked about three crucial values: truth, beauty, and goodness. And I think they're all important. I don't think we have any debate about that. But I have become increasingly interested in the issue of beauty. It seems to me ironic that we should have a renaissance in the interest of art, and we travel through miles and miles of monstrous ugliness to see beautiful paintings, you know. It's somehow we must be part of a community that is learning how to fashion the forms of urban life so that it not only has justice and truth and all the other values built in it, but also a sense of beauty. And to make, this is not the City Beautiful movement, but it's a part of the value orientation that seems to me a liberal arts college must be concerned about. Well, those are some of the reflections that I feel prompted to make concerning the challenges of the city to our college.